Well, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our final No One Left Behind event today. I'm delighted to be hosting this afternoon's session as Chair of EDAS in partnership with SLADE, the Scottish Local Authorities Economic Development Group, and I'm looking forward to some really interesting contributions and discussion today. As you will all know, No One Left Behind is the Scottish Government's strategy to deliver more effective and joined-up employability support across Scotland. And our two earlier events in December and earlier this month covered No One Left Behind from the perspective of young people and inequalities, as well as communities. Recordings of these events are still available for viewing on the EDAS website if you missed them, and I'd recommend taking a look if you would like a rounded sense of the discussion we've held around No One Left Behind so far. This series of events forms part of our EDAS Inclusive Growth Community of Practice and aims to allow you to hear contributions from those who are leading and influencing policy and practice, as well as providing the opportunity for you to pose questions and views to our speakers based on your own experience. As usual, we have an excellent lineup of contributors today, including Ishbel Bremner, SLADE Chair and Economic Growth Manager with Argyll and Bute Council, Chris Brodie, Head of Skills Planning and Sector Development with Skills Development Scotland, and Susan Love, Head of External Affairs with the Federation of Small Businesses Scotland. And I'll introduce each of those more fully before they begin. I also want to share that each panel member, unusually actually for us, is a board member with EDAS. I don't think I've had that before. And we've all been working with our fellow directors to create a new EDAS strategy over the last few months. And I'll be sharing a draft of that with EDAS members this week as we look to ensure our vision for the next 3 years aligns with the needs of our members. Addressing inclusion and inequality, particularly in the light of the impact of the pandemic, is a clear priority in our new strategy and will inform the kinds of events, CPD and learning we develop for members in the years ahead. So your views in response to what we share via the strategy and as part of today's discussion will influence what we do in the future. To begin today's event, though, we know that the pandemic has been devastating for many businesses across Scotland over the last year, especially in our tourism, hospitality, retail, leisure and personal services sectors. Whilst furlough has offered a buffer for some employees, we know it does not cover all business costs, and the strain on people's financial, mental and emotional well-being has truly been unprecedented. The plan to move out of lockdown has brought some hope, but there's clearly still uncertainty about what the future holds, with new variants of the virus likely to be circulating and evolving for some time to come. The focus of today's session is on businesses and the support they need going forward. And each of our speakers will provide their own perspectives on this as you work to support the businesses in your own lives and in your own work and their employees across Scotland as it opens up again. Now, before we kick off, you'll see that we're muting everyone as usual, except for the speakers, but can I ask that you use the chat box to raise any questions or comments, and we'll pick up on these after the main presentations. And I'd also really like to encourage a bit of discussion today, if possible. I know it's always a bit stilted sometimes when we're doing these things online, but it'd be great to have a bit of a conversation via the raised hand. So if you please, would like to do that, please don't be shy. So to begin with, our first speaker is Ishbel Bremner, SLADE Chair and Economic Growth Manager with Argyll and Bute Council. Ishbel has nearly 29 years of experience and in-depth knowledge in the field of economic development, having worked in Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Scottish Enterprise and the private sector. Since 2009, she's worked as the Economic Growth Manager for Argyll and Bute Council. She's National Chair of the Scottish Local Authorities Economic Development Group, SLADE, who are supporting this event today, and is a co-opted Director of EDAS, as I've said. So Ishbel is going to begin with a focus on employability and business support. So over to you, Ishbel. And I think do we have slides for you, Ishbel, as well?
Yes, we do.
I think we do, yes. So we'll just close
yes,
that up.
And Alison's going to be my very glamorous assistant and move them on for me. Thanks very much. No, afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Liz, for the invitation to speak. Alison, just move on to the second slide, please. Thank you. The current pandemic, along with EU exit, has brought about substantive and systemic change which none of us could have predicted. In the short, medium to longer term, focus needs to be given to economic recovery through an inclusive and well-being place-based approach with sustained and future job opportunities. Adhering to the No One Left Behind policy direction to ensure no business is left behind, I have framed a snapshot of some of the economic development activities of local authorities in terms of business and employability support under 4 operating principles. That's facilitation, advice and delivery, identifying recovery opportunities, enabling co-investment and funding, and collaboration and co-production. Alison, you can maybe move on to the third slide. Thank you. In terms of business support, since March 2020, along with other partners and agencies, Council's economic development departments have been integral to the delivery of COVID-19 grant support to eligible businesses through numerous schemes. This support is continuing, but there is concern around business survival going forward, particularly once these support schemes are withdrawn and the support to furloughed staff, the job retention scheme, concludes at the end of September 2021. Business Gateway offers free, impartial and confidential advice to start-up and existing businesses. There's a core national service, but there is flexibility to local delivery. For example, the mechanism of delivery differs across local authorities, where some deliver this support in-house while others contract this service out. Business Gateway support provides very successful interventions such as Digital Boost and repurposed European Regional Development Fund funded programmes focused on recovery. Public realm investment is also key for businesses through community benefit clauses and assistance through supplier development programme local workshops. Smaller businesses can become involved in the bidding and procurement process for local contracts. For example, the Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme, managed by Historic Environment Scotland and disseminated by local authorities, supports local businesses by providing grant support for shopfront improvements and other initiatives to encourage people to visit the area in question. Key sector support, for example, the recent LEADER programme 2014 to 2020 was actually extended to cover farm diversification and sectoral business development, such as some examples. In terms of employability support, as noted earlier, the No One Left Behind employability response to COVID-19 is framed in a place-based approach which supports unemployed individuals, in-work employees and employers through their journey to sustainable employment opportunities across all ages and circumstances. Over recent years, support has been in place under schemes such as Fair Start Scotland, Employability Fund and local council-based initiatives supported by the European Social Fund. The No One Left Behind policy approach and the partnership agreement between the Scottish Government and local government has provided interventions where collective work is continuing and how such interventions need to be flexed to focus on recovery. Some local authorities are gateway organisations for the UK Government's Kickstart scheme, which offers work placements for 6 months for 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit who are at risk of long-term unemployment. A core element of the Young Person's Guarantee, further to recommendations put forward to the Scottish Government through Sandy Begbie's report, also includes a waged opportunity with employers to cover all employment costs for a 26-week work experience placement for 16 to 24-year-olds. Therefore, this support can be used to augment the work placement provided under the Kickstart scheme by a further 6 months. And it should be noted from the 3rd of February 2021, employers can actually apply directly to the Kickstart scheme for any number of job placements. Employers can also choose to apply through a Kickstart gateway organisation such as Argyll and Bute Council. We are one, and including others that support sole traders. Can we move on to slide 4, please, Alison? Thanks. In terms of identifying recovery opportunities, although the current pandemic and new exit has brought about many challenges, there are also some key opportunities which will undoubtedly feature in many of the partnership recovery plans hosted by local authorities. Some of these opportunities are listed, but this is definitely not an exhaustive list. The concept of repopulation zones is being looked at, particularly in areas where population has been in continual decline. This approach also has the important psychological benefit of reframing the discussion away from negative connotations of depopulations onto a more positive, development-oriented repopulation approach. And it is hoped that the net zero transition and green recovery agenda will also offer many cross-sectoral job opportunities and related occupations as well. With increased digital connectivity to all, it is hoped this will improve the parity of access to support to businesses wherever they are located. And the upskilling and reskilling skills agenda is of great importance, and Chris will provide more detail on this during his presentation. Moving on to slide 5, please, Alison. Thank you. Identifying opportunities also requires financial investment and support. The growth and city deals hosted by local authorities have provided a key platform to lever in further investment. For example, even prior to the formal sign of the final deal in Argyll and Bute, which is my current stomping ground, funding has been secured by economic growth from the Clyde Mission Fund to repurpose a council building in Dunoon into a community STEM hub, which will act as a pilot on the rollout of other STEM hubs proposed in the area's rural growth deal. No One Left Behind Phase 2 work is continuing on strengthening local employment partnerships, where local authorities will continue to host the financial allocations, but delivery will involve key partner agencies and organisations. Further to the Infrastructure Investment Plan for Scotland, which 21-22 to 25-26 published on the 4th of February this year, there are currently other funding streams that have just recently been announced, which are open competitive bid processes. For example, round 4 of the Rural Infrastructure Fund has opened, and the UK government's Levelling Up and Community Renewal funds, where business benefits will undoubtedly be realised. An investment priority, or a key investment priority for the UK Community Renewal Fund, which is a precursor to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, is investment in local businesses, which is encouraging. And moving on to my final slide, Alison. It's slide 6. In terms of collaboration and co-production, an important and imperative issue around recovery is that no one council, agency or organisation can do this alone. It requires collaboration and co-production from all stakeholders across the public, private and third sector. Local authorities are part of a local and regional economic partnerships in order to focus on recovery. For example, the Argyll and Bute Economic Resilience Forum, chaired by Highlands Islands Enterprise, provides a forum for key businesses and industries to shape economic and social recovery. And the Federation of Small Businesses is a member of that, and Susan will focus more on business needs later. In short, only by working together, trusting each other and providing honest, evidence-based assessment of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and EU exit, will be able to facilitate the preparation, delivery and implementation of fair and inclusive economic and social recovery plans at the local, regional and national level to ensure that no business is left behind. Thanks very much. That's me, Liz. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Ishbel. That was a really good introduction, really good overview as well of you know, what's happening, particularly from a public sector perspective. And I don't think we should in any way underestimate the pressures that have been felt by local authorities and people working in economic development over the last year, just to try and move really swiftly to provide that kind of support to local businesses. So, you know, I really want to acknowledge that today. And also your last comment, which I absolutely, I and the board at EDAS fully endorse, because our strategy going forward is very much about how we broaden the conversations and the partnerships that we have across sectors. Okay, so next up, our second speaker this afternoon is Chris Brodie, who's Head of Skills Planning and Sector Development with Skills Development Scotland. Chris leads a team of more than 40 staff who are responsible for delivering a robust, industry-informed, evidence-based informed skills system in Scotland. He joined SDS in 2012 and has 20 years experience in economic and sales development. And I think many of you will know Chris previously as Managing Director of SLIMS and with UK Economic and Regeneration Consultancies. And Chris is going to share an insight into the changing nature of the labour market and Skills Development Scotland's response to this over the last year and moving forward. So over to you, Chris.
Great, thanks, Liz. And I'm just going to try and share my screen here. There we go. Can folks see that?
Yep, you're fine, Chris.
Great. So I just want to start with a point of clarification, Liz, if that's okay. So I think you said I had 28 years experience and Ishbel had 29 years experience in economic development. I think it's important to point out that both Ishbel and I started in economic development when we were in primary school. So we're not as old as we seem. Listen, thanks for the introduction. What I'm not going to do today is talk about a lot of the programmes that Isabel's already introduced. And I think the point that she's made about the response to COVID, both for individuals and businesses, being one that absolutely needs to be a collaborative one. I would just absolutely echo that. I want to take a slightly different take on where we are at the moment and really kind of build an argument about why the principles behind No One Left Behind, I think, are going to be critical, not just as we emerge from COVID, but actually over the next kind of 5-10 years in the labour market. I will talk about some of the support measures that we've put in place across SDS, but I think those absolutely need to be viewed in the context of that collaborative effort that Isabel's referred to. And I can't get my slides to work. There we go. So I want to just begin by kind of highlighting 5 challenges, which I think are, they dominated the conversation about skills pre-COVID. They will dominate the conversation about skills post-COVID. So we know that Scotland's got really challenging demographic trends. Our working age population is going to shrink. Isabel's referenced the challenges of rural depopulation. Brexit, I think, will exacerbate our challenges in relation to the labour market in 2 directions. We know that Brexit's already had a significant effect in a number of sectors. Critically, Scotland's workforce grew by something like, Scotland's working age population grew by 290,000 in the 8 years in the run up to Brexit. And 90% of that was due to in-migration to Scotland. So there's a big fundamental which has been undone as a result of the decision to leave the European Union. We know that the world of work is changing significantly. The impact of digitisation, automation, artificial intelligence has got the potential to take out large numbers of jobs. I saw a report this morning suggesting that the oil and gas sector in the North East is having a difficult enough time. Automation may move out another 28,000 jobs in kind of offshore oil and gas activity. I think the other thing that we saw underway was big changes in terms of the nature of work and the fragmentation of work. Lots of people working in 0 hours contracts or working multiple jobs. COVID has added another dimension to that, in that we're seeing that relationship between where people work and where people stay absolutely kind of broken. We are all in a place where most of the organisations that we're working in are going to move towards some kind of hybrid model of working where you're at home 2 days a week and you're in the office a couple of days a week. And the final big kind of driver of change, and I will talk a little bit about what we're doing in respect to this, is the transition to net zero. So the commitment of Scottish Government to reduce carbon emissions by 75% by 2030, I would not underestimate the scale of the challenge that's required there, for a couple of reasons. One, it's a big number, and 2, a lot of the low-hanging fruit, for want of a better term, has been picked off. We have decarbonised their energy supply. By and large in Scotland, we now need to decarbonise transport, decarbonise heating in homes, real fundamental changes across how the economy operates. All of these things point to, I think, an increasingly turbulent labour market where people will fall in and out of occupations, need to reskill and retrain. And that, for me, the principles behind No One Left Behind become really important. It's not just about making sure that young people are not left behind. It's about making sure that those people who are working in those industries who are under some degree of risk are not left behind by the transitions that we're seeing taking place. And I'm not going to linger on COVID other than to say that actually the impact of the pandemic has been to both accelerate this process of change, but also magnify some particular aspects of it. So, I've mentioned the changes in relation to kind of home working and the investment in kind of home digital technology. I would argue that a number of the jobs that we have seen lost in the retail sector will just not now come back as a result of COVID. We've got some big challenges in terms of what goes on in respect of our kind of city centres. So kind of picking up on this, we're beginning to see the restrictions on economic activity beginning to loosen. We're certainly in a more optimistic place over the next kind of 6 to 12 weeks than we've been in for a long time. I think it's important to say that we're not out of the woods yet in terms of challenges around businesses. So some of the sectors that Isabella mentioned, accommodation and food services, 41% of businesses still saying that they're at risk of insolvency over the next kind of 6 months. So worse could be kind of yet to come. Yes, we'll be able to go to the hairdressers from the 5th of April. I, for one, I'm delighted about that. My hair's getting somewhat long, but we will not be able to participate in kind of large-scale events, go to the theatre, necessarily go to cinemas. So the arts, entertainment, recreation sector's probably at the back of the queue in terms of jobs coming back. We know that retail's been significantly impacted in the pandemic, and lots of jobs have been lost there. I've mentioned already the rise of home working. I think that rise of home working has got the potential to have a significant effect on city centres. If just 20% of people don't go back to the office 5 days a week, think about the impact that that has on transport, think about the network, the impact that it has on the Pretts, the Greggs, the All Bar Ones of this world. I'll probably give you a wee bit of an indication into how I used to spend my money when I was in the city centre, but all those businesses are going to be affected and not generate jobs. Critically, these jobs are by and large lower skilled jobs. So I think there's a challenge for us about the extent to which low skilled jobs are going to continue to be created. I've done my doom and gloom bit, which I'm infamous for. So I'll try and kind of turn around and look at a bit of optimism. So where are we seeing opportunities emerging in the short to medium term? And I would think around 3 dimensions. So first, actually at the moment, we know that there are some areas where jobs are being created, particularly around health service, around distribution and logistics, and around social care. These have maintained really kind of strong recruitment patterns over the last 12 months. As we move through restart, I think we'll see a strong bounce back in terms of hospitality and tourism, albeit that may be 2 or 3 months away. And in some parts of the country, in particular in Isabel's part of the world, I think there are probably concerns about the ability to source local people to actually work in some of those businesses. We also expect to see the construction sector kind of bounce back. The key prize, I think, is about the nature of the jobs recovery that Scotland experiences. And I think that the net zero transition and digital technologies and the whole arena around cybersecurity, those are 2 areas where Scotland absolutely has the potential to create significant numbers of high quality jobs. Financial and professional services remain strong, and we're still seeing a strong investment pipeline, and early years learning and childcare remains a government commitment and will continue to generate significant job opportunities. Of that list, it's interesting that actually early years learning and childcare, retail, tourism traditionally kind of draw from a similar kind of labour market, a similar labour pool. There may well be opportunities to connect people who've lost their jobs in retail, actually some opportunities around early years learning and childcare. And finally, it's clear, I think we're going to have to have a close eye on the work that Isabel's referred to that's going on through city deals and going on through local authorities and regional economic partnerships. We need to have our ear to the ground in terms of understanding how colleagues in local government's investment in the transition to net zero and the creation of new jobs is actually going to drive the demand for skills. So if that's the context, what have we been working on? What have we been doing in SDS, both to respond to the challenges of COVID, as well as looking at this turbulent kind of labour market? And this is not an exclusive list, but I thought I'd very quickly pick out 5 things. There's been a significant focus on building up our capacity to respond to redundancy. So in terms of the pay service, we've had to move from a redundancy service that was delivered one-to-one into one that's delivered online and one-to-many. We've increased staff capacity on the PACE helpline, both to respond to the increasing number of redundancies and the challenges there. We've been developing a career upskilling and reskilling offer to help people navigate that turbulence in the labour market. It comes as no surprise that a big focus of our effort within SDS has been about protecting apprenticeships. And not just because that's a programme that we run, but recognising that young people's transitions have been severely impacted by the pandemic. So just at the end of last year, we introduced an apprentice employer grant, which provides an incentive either for employers to recruit a new apprentice or to upskill an existing employee via an apprenticeship. And that attracts a grant funding of between £3,500 to £5,000. We've also developed an Adopt an Apprentice programme, which supports employers and provides an incentive to recruit redundant apprentices, as well as looking at how we support apprentices finish their apprenticeship qualification if they've been made redundant, and also supporting young people to get access into apprenticeships as they come back online this year. A big focus of our effort, and Isabel kind of referenced this, is about understanding where jobs are and working collaboratively with partners to align skills provision behind job opportunities. So through August to October, August to November last year, my regional teams and my sectoral teams were working closely with regional college principals and regional economic partnerships around that very question: where are we seeing jobs now and in the medium term, and how can we pivot the provision, whether it's an apprenticeship, whether it's a college course, whether it's a university course, whether it's a bit of employability provision behind that kind of ambition. We're beginning to see the emergence, I think, of a national coherent offer around upskilling and reskilling. The early iterations of this have been absolutely focused on the availability of kind of resource in the immediate kind of COVID crisis. I think upskilling and reskilling is going to need to become a consistent part of what we do in terms of skills investment in Scotland. So 3 areas I draw attention to: National Transition Training Fund, which is, again, upskilling support for those who've been made redundant, who are at risk of redundant, to transit into an immediate job opportunity. Flexible Workforce Development Fund, developed and delivered in conjunction with the Funding Council, targeted very much at those in work and helping them to upskill. And we've also continued the individual training account support to allow people, irrespective of whether they're in work or out of work, undertake upskilling. Final thing I'll kind of point to, just to kind of round off, and this really is looking to the future, I think the transition to net zero and the delivery of a just transition where no one is left behind is going to be absolutely essential to the recovery. We published the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan in December this year. My team, along with colleagues in Scottish Enterprise High, SOCI, Zero Waste Scotland, are currently working on an implementation plan to bring to deliver the skills support that will require for the transition to net zero. I'll pick out a few things here. That's going to include a kind of future insight programme, mapping the investment that's coming through local authorities and through Scottish Cities Alliance in support of the transition to net zero, developing a Green Jobs Skills Hub, which will support businesses to make behaviour change and investment, a Green Jobs Workforce Academy that we think will include a skills assessment tool, will include upskilling support, and will also include kind of online training and delivery. And finally, that just transition, to echo at the point that Isabel made at the end of her presentation, it's not just about people, it's about places, and it's about collaboration. We think that the response to Scotland's response to the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan will only work if we've got regionally endorsed and regionally sensitive approaches in place. I'll kind of pause there, bang on my 15 minutes, and hand back to Liz. Thanks,
Chris. Yes, I'm incredibly impressed. You're absolutely right, bang on 15 minutes there. You've got that down to a T. And thanks for a really comprehensive, in a very short period, overview of the response from Skills Development Scotland. And my goodness, the range of activities, services, projects, thinking that's going into this, it's really substantial. I see from the chat box that we've got somebody who's asking, will we share the slides after this session? Yes, we always share our slides, copies of the recordings of the events and any slides, and actually information from the chat box as well, with all participants. That's just a practice we've adopted since we moved online, so don't worry about that. Okay, so thank you, Chris, that was excellent. So moving on to our final speaker for this afternoon, we have Susan Love, who's Head of External Affairs with the FSB, the Federation of Small Businesses Scotland, which is the country's largest direct member business organisation, representing thousands of small firms across Scotland. Susan leads on policy and has responsibility for the organisation's interactions with government, as well as representing the FSB on a number of national groups. Before taking up her post with FSB, Susan worked with the former presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament, Sir George Reid, and she served as an elected member of Stirling Council. Now Susan's going to offer thoughts and reflection on what businesses now need. So I think those are your slides on the screen there, Susan. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Liz. And once again, I'm going to call on Alison to do my next slide, please, bit for me. Thank you. So those of you who've heard me before, my apologies for the broken record part at the start of this presentation, but I think it's really important that I provide a little bit of context about small businesses. So I'm going to talk about FSB, context about small businesses. I am going to talk about the impact of the COVID crisis because it's central to where small businesses are right now. Then I'm going to talk about various data sets that we're drawing on at the moment to tell us a little bit about small businesses, recovery and jobs. And then lastly, some key points about small businesses and employment. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the FSB is a membership organisation for self-employed and small businesses. We offer our members a range of services, products, advice, and we lobby government to help create a better environment for small businesses. And many of you might be familiar with my colleague Barry McCulloch, who is our skills and employability guru. So my apologies, you're stuck with me today. So I'm going to give a more general overview. Thinking about small businesses in Scotland in particular, I think it's always worth just reminding ourselves of what our economy and business really looks like. So of the businesses in Scotland, of which there are just over 360,000, 98% of those are small, but in fact 93% of those are micros, so that's businesses that employ fewer than 10 people. Now it's true that of course a large chunk of all the number of businesses don't employ anyone, that's about 100,000, but that still leaves about 1 million jobs that are accounted for in Scotland from small businesses alone. It's a bigger figure for SMEs. And all in all, that's 43% of private sector jobs that come from small businesses. And that proportion is even higher in the rural and remote areas. Next slide, please, Alison. I'm going to talk a little bit about COVID because, as I mentioned, this crisis is nowhere near over from the small business perspective. Here are just a selection of different statistics about where small businesses are at the moment. So according to our recent survey that we did, approximately just under half of small businesses have furloughed some staff since March 2020. That doesn't mean that the 47% have currently got staff furloughed. That's the percentage that have used that scheme. So far, only 15% have made redundancies. I think that, you know, if we'd been looking at this in October, I think at that point it was about 10% and we'd expected it to rocket by the end of the year. But as we know, things have changed. So the current figure we have is 15% have made redundancies so far. And obviously we'll come on to what's likely to happen later in the year. A really absolutely critical point, which I think will be spoken about more in the coming months, but isn't at the moment, is the sheer scale of the debt that's been taken on by its SMEs across the UK and in Scotland. So £3.3 billion of debt just by Scottish SMEs. If you look at the lending figures for SMEs versus large businesses have actually saved money during this crisis. They've got negative debt. It's actually SMEs where all this debt has fallen. So about half of our members have taken on debt to deal with COVID, and about half of them, this is the first time they've taken on debt. So this has significant implications for the capacity of what small businesses do next. And another point I just wanted to mention here is the mental health impact. Now, obviously throughout this crisis, the impact on mental health has been raised across different parts of society. I mention it specifically in relation to small businesses because these are the people, as we've just said, who are responsible for employing 1 million people in Scotland. These are people that make all of the decisions themselves, sometimes with expert advice from HR or other consultants, but often completely on their own at the same time as they're trying to keep the business afloat. And I suppose our specific concern is, do we make good decisions if we're in a poor state of mental health? So I think it's important context to think about the capacity of our business owners at the moment as they come up to a really difficult time about making decisions. The next slide, please, Alison. But one other thing it's important to mention is the impact of this crisis has been uneven on small businesses. So you will hear us talk quite often about the sort of overwhelming sense of crisis, and that is true, but it is uneven and it affects the experience of different businesses and will vary according to their sector. this is and to try and get underneath that a little bit, to try and get a little like sense of where businesses were, we did a really quick survey of our members. We did it in the middle of January. We did it again a couple of weeks ago. So this is the results from a couple of weeks ago. And really, we just wanted to get underneath that and understand where are small businesses right now. So what you can see from this is about 10% are doing well right now. If you're a business in the health sector, for example, or certain aspects of food and drink, probably doing quite well right now. About a quarter are doing okay. But then you have the remaining sort of 2/3 of businesses who are in trouble. And that is consistent with the sort of results that we had in mid-January. So some are doing okay, small group are doing really well, the majority are really struggling right now. So this is from about 900 businesses, so it's a pretty big sample covering a range of different sectors. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to share as well with you, the next few slides are going to mention some data that's not been published from us yet. I think we're going to publish it next week. So this is from a big piece of work that we externally commissioned. The data was gathered last October both from our membership and from other small businesses. Now, one of the things we asked them about was, what do you think as a small business should be a priority for investment to help recovery? And I mentioned this just in terms of what do they think that government should be investing in for recovery? And the top point will probably come as no surprise to you, and I'll come back to this at the end. But what comes through very, very clearly from all of our survey work is that, of course, really what businesses want to do is to be able to help themselves. So really what they want is government to do as much as possible that will help them, not do things to them, but help them to recover themselves. So the overarching ask, which again, it might be unsurprising, is can you help me survive? Can you give me breathing space to recover by reducing cost? And there's lots that different parts of government can do there to think about where you touch business and particularly where that costs business. And I know we're all up against cost pressures, but it's something to think about. Interestingly, schemes to help create jobs, next highest priority. And also, again, this issue of we always understand about the importance of our places to small businesses is how high up this list town centres come in terms of the importance of investment. And again, if we think about how we traditionally think about, spending on infrastructure for recovery, look how far down the list transport comes. Now, that's really surprising to us, but as I say, this is not published yet, so I'm sharing it with you today, but I think it's just really interesting to see where would small businesses put their money. Next slide, please. So just briefly then, some of the points that we have learned over the years about small businesses and employment, and many of you will be familiar with this, having worked in the field for many, many years. So the first point is, what did we learn after the last recession? So the first thing was that the jobs in small businesses were a lot stickier than we might have thought at the start of the recession. So small businesses were more likely to retain staff, even if they were working under capacity, just because of how difficult it is for them to find good staff. So they're more likely to hang on to people if it's at all possible. The second point is that small businesses, and this is counterintuitive, are a good source of jobs for the long-term unemployed. So 9 out of 10 people after the last recession who moved from long-term unemployment into the labour market did so either through working for an SME or from self-employment. The next point is what really matters for small businesses in recruitment. And the point that I've mentioned here is that the fit is really important. So we're thinking about, again, and apologies if I'm teaching my granny to suck eggs here, but we're thinking about small workforces where human interactions are absolutely critical to the success of a recruitment exercise. And so we did some work with rocket science after the last recession to look at some of the recruitment aspects of micro businesses in particular. So that report's still available. It's called Micros Untapped. And that really revealed to us Not just what sort of bureaucratic support structures and accessibility are helpful for small businesses, but also this real importance of getting the right person. So better to get the right person into a job than put the wrong person in, because that ends badly both for the person and for the business's chances of future recruitment. And the last point I'll just raise is about stubborn challenges that we know exist in small businesses in relation to employment. So we know that the smallest businesses don't invest much in training. We also know that smaller businesses are less likely to recruit the very youngest people compared to larger businesses. There's been very little change in these sort of stubborn challenges over the last 10 to 15 years. Everybody will be aware of them, but I think it's important just to restate those. Next slide, please. So again, this is coming up from our forthcoming research. So this is unpublished again. So we asked this big sample of businesses what their intentions looked like. Now bear in mind this was gathered in October, so subject to potential change in terms of where we're at in the crisis now. But perhaps not as pessimistic as people might assume. So overall, roughly a quarter think that they will employ more staff. And so obviously that quarter becomes absolutely critical when we're thinking about the capacity of where new jobs are going to come from as we move forward. Next slide, please. And then, of course, the really important question, and what would help you to do this? And sadly, no easy answer here, just in case anyone hoped there might be. So I'm back to this sort of central point again. So the most important outcome for businesses is for the economy to recover. So more demand is the most likely reason as to why I would recruit. The next highest reason is wage subsidies, which is helpful because that's the most common tool that we tend to use, I guess. But you'll see how quickly it drops away in terms of how useful some of the other interventions are to businesses. So we have, we spent time in the past thinking about whether we could offer better HR support to some small businesses because we know that that's an issue. But you can see that those become important for a smaller and smaller number of businesses. So it doesn't mean I wouldn't consider them, but it just gives you a sense of where businesses are at the moment in terms of what's most likely to help. Next slide, please. So just to recap then. So key messages. The best outcome is for healthy businesses overall. So what businesses are really looking for is to see employability not as a sort of a work stream of itself, but just to be seen as one tool in our box about recovery. So very much see employability as one thing that can be done to help business, but actually we need to look at this bigger picture of what else can our organisations do to support business. Second point is around this, I suppose, fairly obvious point around designing support around small businesses. So what do we know works for them? What do we know doesn't work for them? Some of that is I've mentioned, some of it's fairly obvious to those of us who've worked with small businesses over the years. I think there's some good start being made in terms of, Young Persons Guarantee. Sandy Begbie's report highlighted the importance of SMEs and what support that they would need. There's been some improvements to, for example, Flexible Workforce Development Fund, as Chris mentioned, but there is still room to improve on some of this. So, for example, how do we get that balance right between the opportunities that arise at working at a really local place-based focus? So thinking about what opportunities we might have via community wealth building and employability with some of the kinks that can arise with a localised approach. So one of the things we'll quite often hear, particularly from businesses that are in and around bigger city regions, is I've got this great person, I want to hire them, but they live in East Renfrewshire and I'm in Glasgow. What do I do? And so working out some of the practicalities to make it easier from the employer perspective, still bits of tweaking that could be done there. I'll mention Fair Work here. That's challenging in the current environment. So we need to think about what's the right way to broach fair work discussions with small businesses. And also there's something around some of the age issues. So as I mentioned, we know that small businesses are less likely to employ younger people, which is problematic if that's where we're going to see the greatest concentration of unemployment. But similarly, we do think that small businesses are more likely to employ older people, and might there be more to be done there to incentivise recruitment of older workers. And the last point is about this is something that's been mentioned already by some of the other speakers. It's just about how nimble our offer can be to respond to changes in the economy. So the first is obviously the landscape post-furlough. So as Ishbel mentioned, furlough comes to an end in September. Throughout this, there have been various predictions about what's going to happen to employment when furlough comes to an end. The truth is we don't know yet. We don't know where we will be in September. I know we'll plan on the basis of how we model that it's going to turn out. But if it isn't where we expect it to be, how do we adapt the programmes that we had planned or the services that we have offered to deal with the economic situation we find ourselves in? Second point, Chris actually picked up on this, is about the post-Brexit labour and skills issues. We are already hearing from tourism businesses in particular around how they're going to get staff when the season opens. And so as Chris set out far more articulately than I can, there's a potential mismatch there in terms of what we're used to setting up and offering and the actual demand coming from businesses. And bear in mind, a lot of these will be businesses who are not used to interacting with any of our public sector skills landscape. And the last point is just around the opportunities for appetite for change. So net zero is an obvious one. From an individual business perspective, apart from those businesses who are directly working in that sector, I would say most small businesses are pretty far away from this. I don't think your average business or person really understands what we're talking about when we talk about transition to net zero. So there's still a little bit of distance to travel there, I think, in terms of getting businesses to think about the opportunities there. But where there are definitely opportunities relate to adaptations that are happening in a lot of businesses at the moment, particularly in relation to digital. So again, Ishbel mentioned this, but there's a real demand for digital upskilling in businesses at the moment. We've tried for years to get businesses to have this appetite for digital upskilling, and it's here now, so we need to try and make the most of it. And lastly, again, I think there might be opportunities in relation to flexible working, again, as Ishbel said, particularly for those local economies which are in more rural or remote areas and suffer from depopulation. We do think that there are opportunities here that local businesses can capitalise on. So I will leave it there and look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And again, once again, really comprehensive. I mean, swift, obviously, in the time that they've got, but incredibly comprehensive presentation there. And I think leaving us in no doubt of the really important work that the FSB does in terms of capturing the mood and the experiences and the views of its members and bringing that to the table so that people can actually consider that. People like Chris and Skills Development Scotland, etc., can take those points on board in terms of looking at where we go in the future. Now I'm looking to the chat box just now. We've got about, let me just check, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to allow also just some final comments from each of our contributors as well, some final thoughts. So looking at the chat box, I think Pamela Reid had the first question in, so well done, Pam. I'm just going to read it out unless you want to come in, unless you want to speak. I can read it out for you. And I noticed, I was laughing, you said you pressed the question too quickly. But essentially you were saying...
yeah, I can speak if you want to.
Yeah, it's nice to hear people, you know.
Yes, I'm sorry I pressed send too soon, but I've just... too excited about it all. Anyway, my question was really linking the employability side and the exclusion side and the no one left behind in terms of the people and the businesses. My concern is that we've seen digital exclusion. We've seen, people not being able to, children and young people not being able to access education because they haven't got either the digital skills or the equipment to do so. And then we're looking at, where are the workers going to come from in the future? And my question really is about how can we make sure that we can address the effects on attainment for that cohort, so that the businesses and the employers do have the staff with the skills in the future. It's the kind of the two sides of the equation.
I suspect that question's for you, Chris, at least to begin with.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And listen, great question, Pam. Good to see you. I would take a step back. So the impact of COVID has been huge, and the worst of it is still to come, or certainly if you look at the unemployment statistics. I think we need to think about the different groups of people who've been impacted by this. Young people in school had their education, significantly kind of challenged. College students not qualifying, young people who've been made redundant, university students who are going to be graduating out into the toughest labour market since, at least 2008, 2009. And then lots of people who've lost their jobs, who've been in, work for a long period of time. So I think we've got to recognise that the challenge that's facing us is quite multifaceted. The response, and I think at a certain level, it's pretty simple. We need to protect jobs. We need to create jobs. We need to align training provision behind where jobs are going to be. But critically, we need to give people the skills at all levels of education, whether it's school, college, or apprenticeship or whatever. We need to embed in them digital capabilities. We need to embed in them climate awareness. We need to embed in them kind of the ability to kind of navigate the turbulence that we've got. So I think it's a pretty complex, multifaceted problem, which has got a complex, but at the heart of it, a pretty simple solution. It's got to be about jobs for me going forward.
Chris, can I just come in just quickly and ask a kind of supplementary on that? I mean, how do you feel about, because I mean, I can clearly see where Pam's coming from, the educational dimension. We've focused a lot on younger people and the challenges faced by them, but there's a whole group of people over 50, that have been made redundant who, if we're looking at kind of jobs being created in this new green economy and new skills required, how do we make sure that people in that age bracket aren't just potentially written off, in the way that our future economy develops?
Yeah, I think it's. I think you're partly making the point I was making, Liz, is that actually the skills recovery needs to be a skills recovery for everyone. Who's someone who's kind of fast approaching 50. I've got a personal interest in that over the next 5 years as well, I suppose. But I think that this focus in saying a single group is more important than another and we need to focus on them, I think kind of misses the point. This is a crisis that's impacted on all sorts of people all across the country, all age ranges, all skill sets as well. I mean, I think one of the untold stories of kind of COVID has been the long-term impact in the Northeast. So if you look back at the number of jobs that have been lost in the Northeast over the last kind of 8 years, it's about 15% full-time jobs have gone. So there's a regional dimension to this. There's a people dimension. There's actually a big gender dimension to it as well. It's a terrible phrase, but the economists termed this the first she session. This is the first labour market recession for I think recorded history, where women have fallen out of the labour market at a greater rate than men. So I think we need to recognise this is a big multi-complex problem that probably doesn't lend itself to simple one-dimensional solutions.
Okay. Ishbel or Susan, do you have anything you want to add to that, or will we move on to because there are some other questions, I think, or at least one other question? Ishbel, do you want to say anything on that?
No,
or are you happy?
It's just that in terms of no one left behind, in terms of employer recruitment incentives, it's not just the young person's guarantee employer recruitment incentive and in work training, it's about all ages. So, councils are repurposing that. There's the employer recruitment incentive, so it taps into all ages. But I think there's quite a few questions coming in, Liz, so I'll not labour the point.
I can see that. Okay, there's a couple of questions from Denise, and I can see Denise has got her hand up. Denise, if I can maybe just take the first one and say that yes, EDAS does have partnerships and is having conversations across the UK and Europe. So maybe we can take that one as a given, because we connect with SDI, Global Scotland, Europa, etc. So internationalisation is on our agenda and isn't going to disappear. But the second question is maybe getting to the crux of some of what we're discussing here. Do you want to come in, Denise, or will I read what you've written? I see you've got your hand up. I suspect you want to come in. In fact, you need to be unmuted. Can we do that? Sorry, just wait a second, Denise. I think we need to unmute you. Maybe it's easier if I just read it. Okay, so Denise is saying the upbeat tone is helpful, but do we agree that these are unprecedented times with work-life change unlikely to return to normal? Some describe this Great Reset as a means for the rich to get richer. From where I'm sitting, we're on the cusp of the Great Depression of the 21st century, yet some economists suggest we'll be back at 2019 levels by the end of the year. I know nobody has a crystal ball, but the trouble is with living in the moment is it makes planning for recovery impossible. And I suppose it's just, you know, do you have any thoughts on that from the panel? Do you know, I mean, these are unprecedented times. Are you, I suppose on balance, are you've suggested there's a mix of optimism and depression, but are we being overly optimistic here? I think that's what you're saying, Denise. Would that be right? Sorry, we can't seem to unmute you. I don't want to speak on your behalf. Alison, can you help with the unmuting?
Unfortunately, due to GDPR, I can't unmute people. It's,
right.
it's there.
Okay, I'm so sorry, Denise. We seem to be having a problem. Okay, I think our panelists can see what's been written in the chat box, and I've obviously just gone over it. Does anybody have any comment for Denise on her perspective?
Can I dive in with something, Liz?
Yeah, of course.
This is just sort of, it's not specific to Denise's question. It picks up on a couple of the comments that are coming through and what Chris said. I think really from our perspective, I just think that what we want is for public policy to not get hung up on some of the mistakes we've made in the past. So quite often in the past, we've always, I suppose, put all our eggs in a few baskets. So we have always thought that we know what the magic answer is to turn around the Scottish economy or what the next great hope has been. And we, however much we try to resist it, we quite often find ourselves going back to the things that we feel safe doing because we've always done them. And I suppose one of our reflections would just be to think about what this crisis has taught us, about what we valued. And Chris mentioned the care sector, for example, which, and I'm not. This is not meant at SDS. This is more meant overall economists, shall we say? Like nobody's valued the care sector in economics terms. I spent 20 years sitting around the table, you know, talking about economic strategy. Nobody's ever valued that highly. Now we've seen what the real value is of that. We see what the job opportunities are. Will we finally elevate that to recognise the importance of that? As a sector that's critical to society and and in terms of job opportunities. There are other parts of the economy too that we could make those same comments about. And that is true as well. I see all the comments coming in about no demographic group deserves attention over another. There are different people suffering all over the place. I guess you sum all of that up by what Isabel started off by saying about the place-based basis. We have to think about what works for each local economy, and from a business point of view, you know, I want to hire someone, I've got capacity, I need a bit of help, can you help me? So how can we tailor what we do to help exploit that opportunity and not get caught up in the no, sorry, they're in the wrong postcode or they're the wrong age? I think that's really what we're looking for from outcomes. I'll just really briefly, there was a question there about small businesses. Are they focusing on the wrong things?
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yes, if you could take that, Susan, because that was what I was wanting to make sure we did that with them.
Yeah, I'll just take it head on. Yes, but that is the nature of a small business, where you are firefighting a million crises every single day. That's not when you're in a pandemic. Then it is the nature of a small business. They will by and large deal with the problems in front of them, rather than perhaps more strategic issues that in the longer term would help small business. There's a lot of discussion at the moment around, there's this whole debate around productivity and where small businesses fit into that and how we improve management and leadership skills. Leave that for another day, but yes, but I wouldn't blame them given what I know is on their plates.
Okay, I am conscious of time. We're just now just after 3 o'clock, and we're starting to lose a few people as well, understandably. Can I just ask each of you, Ishbel, Chris and Susan, just for some final thoughts and comments on what you've really been here to discuss today, just to wind up.
Well, I'll start then, Liz. Yes, I think it's just what I was saying in my presentation. We need to have this collective approach, this honest dialogue, and share the evidence that, you know, Chris, we have got fantastic regional skills assessments from Skills Development Scotland, and the findings that Susan's found in terms of, you know, the high proportion of our micro businesses, which is across all our economies, in terms of the information that the businesses are looking for. And certainly in terms of employability, the key thing that Susan mentioned is that we need to fit the person to the job. And that we've had success of that in my patch, because employers, small employers, are taking on more people because we made sure the right person went into the right post, and that's really fundamental. So thanks for that, but we need to do it collectively. That's great. Thank you.
Chris?
Completely agree with Isabel, and summing up, I'll maybe just briefly respond actually to Denise's excellent question. A couple of things I'd say, Denise. I don't think this is the first Great Depression of the 21st century. It's the second. We had a big one in 2008. We've had 3 shocks to the economy: financial crisis, Brexit, and now COVID. I don't believe we're going to bounce back quickly. And I think the focus on when's the economy going to get back to the same size as it was pre-pandemic misses the point. Every recession changes the nature of where jobs are generated. And I think I agree with Susan. We can't simply make the same mistake of saying we've got a crystal ball and we think net zero transition and digital are the only answers. What we need to do is to create sufficient flexibility and agility in employability provision and skills provision to be able to pivot to where opportunities are going to be, because job opportunities are going to be in short supply and going to be really important to capitalise in, I think, over the next 5 years plus.
Okay, thank you. And Susan has already shared that she thinks she's said enough, so doesn't need to sum up. And we're over time now anyway, so thank you very much. Can I just say thank you to our contributors today, to Ishbel, to Chris, and to Susan for taking time out of their very, very busy schedules to be here and to give us a whistle-stop tour and overview of this particular subject. It's been really, really helpful. Condensed a lot into an hour, so I hope you've been able to follow that, but bear in mind you will get the recordings if you want to re-listen and pick up on any further points. That's usually helpful. Thanks also to Elaine and Alison for all the work in the background, and for keeping us online and organised. And finally, thanks to all of you. Again, everyone's I know really pressed for time, so we try and keep these sessions short so that we can accommodate it during your busy working days, but we hope it's been helpful. We will, as I say, get all of the information sent out to you. We'll also be sending out the strategy for EDAS. We love your comments and views on that. And it looks as though we're looking out for your report. Is it next week, did you say, Susan, that the research that you commented on will be being circulated? So we'll make sure we have a link to our news page as well, so that people can actually make sure they see that. So anyway, keep up the work. Good work, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you again at future EDAS events, of which there are many in the planning right now. But in the meantime, I hope that everybody does actually manage to have a good spring break. Okay, thanks very much. Bye now.